I always thought that, after a lifetime of hard work and sacrifice, I'd earned a little peace, maybe even a bit of gratitude. So when my daughter suggested we take a vacation together, it's just the two of us, father and daughter, exploring a place I'd never seen, I felt a flicker of hope. I imagined laughter over shared meals, long walks along unfamiliar streets, the kind of memories that would carry us through the years ahead. I packed my suitcase with care, tucking in a new shirt she'd bought me for the trip, and boarded the plane with a heart full of anticipation. The first few days were everything I'd hoped for. We wandered through bustling markets, sampled strange and wonderful foods, and took photos in front of ancient monuments. She smiled for the camera, her arm around my shoulder, and for a moment I let myself believe that the distance that had crept between us over the years was finally closing. But on the fourth morning, everything changed. I woke to an empty hotel room. Her suitcase was gone. Her phone, always glued to her hand, was nowhere to be found. At first, I thought she'd gone out for coffee or a walk. I waited, watching the clock, telling myself not to worry. But as the hours passed, a cold knot of fear began to form in my chest. I called her name, checked the lobby, asked at the front desk. No one had seen her. I tried her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I sat in the hotel lounge, surrounded by strangers speaking a language I barely understood, and felt the world tilt beneath me. The realization crept in slowly, like a shadow at dusk. I was alone. My own daughter had left me behind. The shock was like a physical blow. I replayed every moment of the trip, searching for some sign, some warning I'd missed. Had I said something wrong? Was I too slow, too old, too much of a burden? The questions circled in my mind, each one sharper than the last. I never thought my own child would leave me stranded. But what I did next, she never saw coming. If you had told me, decades ago, that I would one day be left alone in a foreign country by my own flesh and blood, I would have laughed it off as a cruel joke. My life from the very beginning was built around the idea of family, of loyalty, of sacrifice, of doing whatever it took to give my loved ones a better life than I ever had. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knew your name and your business, and where a man's worth was measured by the strength of his handshake and the depth of his devotion to his family. My own father was a hard man, not unkind, but distant in the way that men of his generation often were. He worked long hours at the mill, came home tired, and expected dinner on the table and children seen but not heard. My mother was the heart of our home, gentle but firm, teaching me that love was shown in actions, not words. I learned early that if you wanted something, you worked for it, and if you loved someone, you put their needs before your own. When I met my wife, I was just a young man with calloused hands and big dreams. She was the light in my life, the one who saw past my rough edges and believed in the man I could become. We built a life together, brick by brick, through lean years and good ones, through laughter and tears. When our daughter was born, I felt a kind of joy I'd never known, a fierce, protective love that made me vow right then and there. To give her everything I could, I worked overtime, took on second jobs, and skipped vacations so we could afford piano lessons, new shoes, and the occasional treat at the ice cream parlor. I missed more than a few of her school plays and soccer games, but I always made it home for bedtime stories and goodnight kisses. I wanted her to know, even when I wasn't there, that she was the center of my world. As she grew, so did my pride. She was smart, curious, and stubborn in a way that reminded me of her mother. When my wife fell ill, our world shifted. I became a caretaker, learning to cook, clean, and comfort in ways I never had before. My daughter was a teenager then, caught between childhood and adulthood, and I worried that the weight of responsibility would crush her spirit. But she surprised me, helping with chores, sitting by her mother's bedside, holding my hand when the nights felt too long. When my wife passed, the house felt impossibly empty. My daughter and I clung to each other, two lost souls trying to find our way. I threw myself into work, determined to keep her life as normal as possible. I paid for her college, even when it meant dipping into my retirement savings. I wanted her to have every opportunity, every chance to chase her dreams. She graduated with honors, and I was there in the front row, tears streaming down my face as she accepted her diploma. She hugged me afterward, whispering, "Thank you. Dad, I couldn't have done it without you." In that moment, every sacrifice felt worth it. After college, she moved to the city, chasing a career and a life of her own. I visited when I could, always careful not to overstay my welcome. I helped her with rent when times were tough, co-signed a loan for her first car, and sent care packages on birthdays and holidays. I never wanted her to feel alone in the world the way I sometimes had. As the years passed, our relationship changed. She became more independent, more focused on her own life. I understood, after all, isn't that what every parent wants? For their child to stand on their own 2 feet? Still, I missed the days when she would call just to chat, when she needed my advice or simply wanted to hear my voice. When she suggested the vacation, I was surprised but delighted. She said she wanted to spend time together, to make new memories. I didn't hesitate. I paid for the flights, the hotel, the tours, happy to do it, happy to be wanted. I even gave her access to my bank account for emergencies, trusting her completely. She was my daughter, my only child, and I wanted her to know that I would always be there for her. Looking back, I see now the small signs I missed, the way she checked her phone more than she looked at me, the impatience in her voice when I asked too many questions, the way she seemed distracted, always half a step ahead. But I brushed it off, telling myself she was just busy, just tired, just young. I remember one evening on the trip, sitting together at a little cafe, the sun setting over the city. She was scrolling through her phone, barely touching her food. I tried to start a conversation to ask about her work, her friends, her life. She answered in short sentences, her eyes never leaving the screen. I felt a pang of sadness, but I pushed it aside. I told myself that just being together was enough. Now, sitting alone in that hotel lobby, the weight of all those years pressed down on me. I thought of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar saved and spent in the hope of making her life better. I wondered if she remembered any of it, if it meant anything to her at all. The contrast between the father I had been and the man I was now, abandoned, bewildered, and alone, was almost too much to bear. But even in my pain, I couldn't bring myself to regret the choices I'd made. I loved her, and I always would. That was the promise I made the day she was born, and it was a promise I intended to keep, no matter how much it hurt. The hours after I realized my daughter had left me were some of the longest of my life. I sat in the hotel lobby, clutching my phone, willing it to ring, hoping for a message, an explanation, anything that would make sense of what had just happened. I watched other families come and go, laughing, arguing, making plans for the day. I felt invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of their happiness. I tried to convince myself there had been a mistake. Maybe she'd been called away for an emergency. Maybe she'd left a note I hadn't seen. Maybe she'd be back any minute with a sheepish apology and a story about a missed bus or a lost phone. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky and the shadows in the lobby grew longer, hope gave way to a cold, creeping certainty. She was gone. She had left me. I replayed our last conversation, searching for clues. The night before, we'd had dinner at a small restaurant near the hotel. She'd seemed distracted, barely touching her food, her eyes darting to her phone every few minutes. I'd tried to ask about her plans for the next day, but she brushed me off, saying she was tired and wanted to get some rest. I remember wishing I could reach across the table and pull her back to me, to the way things used to be, but the distance between us felt insurmountable. When I returned to the hotel room that night, she was already in bed. The covers pulled up to her chin, her back turned to me. I whispered goodnight, but she didn't answer. I lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the city outside, feeling more alone than I had in years. Now, in the harsh light of day, the truth was impossible to ignore. She had planned this. She had waited until we were far from home, in a place where I knew no one and didn't speak the language, and then she had disappeared. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt foolish, naive, betrayed in a way I had never imagined possible. I tried calling her again. My calls went straight to voicemail. I sent messages, first worried, then pleading, then angry, but there was no response. I checked my bank account, hoping for some sign that she was safe. But instead, I saw a series of withdrawals. Restaurants, shops, taxis. She was still in the city, spending money from the account I had trusted her with. But she had cut me off completely. The pain was sharp and immediate. But beneath it was a deeper ache, a sense of loss that went beyond the present moment. I thought of all the times I had put her first, all the sacrifices I had made so she could have a better life. I thought of the little girl who used to run into my arms, who used to beg me to stay just a little longer at bedtime. Where had she gone? How had we ended up here? As the hours dragged on, my worry turned to anger. I felt a burning sense of injustice, a need to reclaim some measure of dignity. I was not a helpless old man waiting to be rescued. I was her father, the man who had given her everything, and I deserved better than this. I made my way back to the hotel room, my mind racing. I packed my things slowly, methodically, refusing to let panic take over. I asked the concierge for help booking a flight home, grateful for his kindness and patience. As I waited in the airport, I watched families reunite, children running into the arms of their parents. I wondered if my daughter would ever understand what she had done. The flight home was a blur. I stared out the window, watching the clouds drift by, replaying every moment of the trip in my mind. I thought about the man I had been when I boarded the plane, a father, hopeful and eager for connection, and the man I was now, battered but not broken by the time I landed. My anger had crystallized into resolve. I would not let her betrayal define me. I would not let her take advantage of my love any longer. I would take back control, not just of my finances, but of my life. That night, as I sat alone in my quiet house, I made a decision. I would close the bank account she depended on. I would show her that actions have consequences, that love is not a license to use and discard. I would remind her and myself that respect is earned, not owed. It was a turning point. The moment I stopped waiting for her to come back and started thinking about how to move forward. I didn't know what the future would hold. I knew one thing for certain. I was done being taken for granted. That first night back home, the house felt colder than I remembered. I wandered from room to room, turning on lights I didn't need, just to chase away the shadows. The silence pressed in on me, thick and heavy, broken only by the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. I sat in my favorite chair, the one with the worn arms and the faded cushion, and let the weight of everything settle on my shoulders. I kept asking myself where I had gone wrong. Was it something I said? Something I failed to do? I thought about all the years I'd spent working, saving, sacrificing, always with her in mind. I remembered the nights I'd come home late, exhausted, but still found the energy to help her with her homework or listen to her talk about her day. I remembered the pride I felt at her graduation, the joy of seeing her succeed, the hope that she would always know how much she meant to me. But now, all those memories felt distant, like scenes from someone else's life. I wondered if she remembered them at all, or if they had faded away, replaced by newer, more convenient truths. I thought about the little girl who used to slip her hand into mine, who used to look at me as if I could fix anything. I missed her more than I could say. The pain of her betrayal was sharp, but it was the sense of being discarded that hurt the most. I had always believed that love was enough, that if I gave her everything, she would never want for anything, least of all affection or loyalty. But now I saw how easy it was to take love for granted, to mistake kindness for weakness. I spent hours replaying the trip in my mind, searching for signs I might have missed. The way she avoided my questions, the impatience in her voice, the way she seemed to be somewhere else, even when she was sitting right beside me. I wondered if she had planned to leave me all along, or if something had changed during those days together. The not knowing gnawed at me, a wound that refused to heal. As the days passed, my sorrow slowly gave way to something else. Simmering anger, not just at her, but at myself. I realized I had allowed her to treat me this way, had made it easy for her to walk away. I had given her access to my bank account, trusted her with my savings, believing that she would never betray that trust. I had wanted so badly to be needed, to be important in her life, that I had ignored the warning signs. I began to see that I had lost myself somewhere along the way. I had become so focused on her happiness, her comfort, her future, that I had forgotten about my own. I had let my world shrink to the size of her needs, and now, with her gone, I was left with nothing but empty rooms and unanswered questions. But as I sat there, staring into the darkness, a new thought began to take root. Maybe it wasn't too late to change. Maybe I could reclaim the parts of myself I had set aside for so long. I didn't have to accept her version of the story. Didn't have to play the role of the helpless old man she had cast me in. I could choose a different ending, one where I stood up for myself, where I demanded the respect I deserved. I realized that love, real love, isn't about giving until there's nothing left. It's about boundaries, about knowing your own worth, about refusing to be taken for granted. I had spent a lifetime teaching my daughter to be strong, to stand up for herself. Now it was time to take my own advice. If she thought I was helpless, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The next morning I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The ache of betrayal was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. Instead, it sharpened my focus. I moved through my morning routine with deliberate care. Shaving, making coffee, reading the paper, reminding myself that I was still capable. Still in control of my own life, I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd once helped my daughter with her homework, and pulled out my checkbook, bank statements, and a notepad. I reviewed every transaction, every withdrawal she'd made during our trip. The numbers told a story of their own: expensive meals, shopping sprees, taxi rides across the city. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a growing sense of resolve. I had trusted her with my finances, believing she would act with care. Now, I saw that trust had been misplaced. I called the bank, my voice steady as I explained the situation. The woman on the other end was polite and efficient, guiding me through the steps to close the joint account and transfer my remaining funds to a new one in my name only. I felt a strange sense of relief as I hung up the phone, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. Next, I wrote my daughter a letter. I took my time, choosing my words carefully. I told her that I loved her, that I always would, but that I could no longer allow myself to be used. I explained that I had closed the account, that she would need to find her own way from now on. I didn't write out of anger, but out of necessity. A boundary drawn not to punish, but to protect what little dignity I had left. I mailed the letter that afternoon, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. I knew she would be shocked, maybe even furious, but I also knew that I had to do this for myself. I had spent too many years putting her needs above my own, too many years hoping that love alone would be enough to keep us close. Now, I understood that respect was just as important. In the days that followed, I took small steps to reclaim my independence. I cooked meals for myself, tried new recipes, and even invited an old friend over for dinner. We talked late into the night, reminiscing about the past and laughing at stories we'd both nearly forgotten. I realized how much I had missed these simple pleasures. How much of myself I had set aside in the name of being a good father. I started going for walks in the park, breathing in the crisp air, watching the world move on around me. I noticed things I hadn't seen in years. The way the sunlight filtered through the trees, the laughter of children playing, the quiet companionship of couples strolling hand in hand. I felt a sense of peace, a reminder that life still held beauty, even in the midst of loss. One afternoon, as I sat on a bench watching the ducks glide across the pond, I saw a father and daughter walking together. The girl was young, her hand tucked securely in her father's, her face alight with trust and joy. I felt a pang of longing, but also a sense of hope. I had given my daughter everything I could, and while I couldn't change the choices she had made, I could choose how I responded. I decided to take a trip of my own. Not to run away, but to rediscover the world on my own terms. I booked a train ticket to a nearby town I'd always wanted to visit, packed a small bag, and set out with no agenda but to see what the day would bring. I wandered through art galleries, sampled pastries at a local bakery, and struck up conversations with strangers. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. Closing the bank account wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about drawing a line and saying, enough. It was about reminding myself and my daughter that love is not a blank check, that trust must be earned and maintained. I hoped that, in time, she would come to understand why I had done what I did. I hoped she would learn to stand on her own 2 feet, to value the things I had tried to teach her. As I returned home that evening, tired but content, I realized that I was no longer waiting for her to call, no longer hoping for an apology that might never come. I had taken back control of my life, one small step at a time. And in doing so, I had found a measure of peace I hadn't known was possible. The plan was simple, but it changed everything. I was no longer the helpless old man she had left behind. I was myself again. Wounded, yes, but wiser. I'm finally ready to move forward. It was a week after I'd closed the bank account when my phone finally rang. I recognized my daughter's number instantly, and for a moment, my heart leapt with hope. Maybe she was calling to apologize, to explain, to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. But as soon as I answered, I heard the tension in her voice, sharp and brittle. "Dad, what happened to the account? My card isn't working. I tried to pay my rent, and it got declined. Did the bank make a mistake?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'd rehearsed this conversation in my mind 100 times, but now that it was here, I felt the old ache return. Still, I knew what I had to say. "No, the bank didn't make a mistake. I closed the account." There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then her voice rose, incredulous and angry. "You closed it? Without telling me? How could you do that?" "I needed that money, Dad. I have bills to pay." I let her words hang in the air for a moment before answering. "I know you have bills, but that account was mine. I opened it to help you when you needed it, not to be taken for granted. I trusted you, and you left me alone in a foreign country. You didn't answer my calls, my messages. You spent my money and disappeared." She sputtered, searching for a defense. "I just needed some space. You were smothering me, Dad. I thought you'd be fine. You always are." I didn't think you'd make such a big deal out of it. Felt a wave of sadness, but also a strange sense of calm. I wasn't fine. I was scared and I was hurt. I never imagined my own daughter would abandon me like that. I've spent my whole life putting you first, making sure you had everything you needed. But I can't keep doing that if it means losing myself. Her voice softened, just a little. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I needed to figure things out on my own." "I understand that," I replied gently. "But figuring things out doesn't mean leaving someone behind. It doesn't mean using them until they have nothing left to give. I love you, and I always will. But I need you to understand that love isn't a free pass to treat someone however you want." She was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing, the faint sound of traffic in the background. Finally, she spoke, her voice small. "So what now? Are you just cutting me off?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "No, I'm not cutting you off. I'm setting a boundary. I want a relationship with you, but it has to be built on respect, not just need. I hope you'll understand that one day." She didn't answer right away. I could sense her wrestling with her pride, her anger, her confusion. I guess I never thought about it like that. I just always thought you'd be there no matter what." "I will be," I said, my voice steady, "but not at the cost of my own dignity. I want you to stand on your own 2 feet to learn what it means to be responsible. That's what I tried to teach you all these years." There was another long pause. Then, quietly, she said, "I'm sorry, Dad, I really am. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you." Closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. "Thank you. That means more than you know. I hope this is a new beginning for both of us." We ended the call on uncertain terms, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of closure. I had stood up for myself, spoken my truth, and drawn a line that needed to be drawn. I knew things wouldn't be easy, that there would be more hard conversations ahead, but I also knew that I had reclaimed something precious, myself-respect, as I set the phone down. I looked around my quiet house and felt a strange sense of peace. I had faced the storm and come out the other side, not unscathed, but stronger. My daughter now knew that I was not someone to be used and discarded, but a man who deserved respect and love in equal measure. And as the sun set outside my window, I realized that what I did next would shape not just my future, but hers as well. In the days that followed our conversation, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened, not just the pain of being left behind, but the years of love, sacrifice, and hope that had come before. The house felt quieter, but not as lonely as before. There was a new kind of peace in the silence, a sense that I had finally reclaimed a part of myself I'd lost along the way. I started to fill my days with small joys. I took longer walks, stopping to chat with neighbors I'd only ever waved to before. I dusted off my old fishing rod and spent a morning by the lake, the gentle lapping of water soothing the last of my anger. I even joined a book club at the local library, something I'd always meant to do but never found the time for. Each new experience reminded me that life still held meaning and possibility. Even after heartbreak, my daughter called a few more times. Our conversations were tentative, careful, but there was a new honesty between us. She asked about my days, and I could hear the effort in her voice, the way she was trying to bridge the gap she'd created. I didn't rush to forgive, but I didn't close the door either. I wanted her to understand that love and respect go hand in hand, that boundaries are not punishments but invitations to healthier relationships, I realized. Two, that I had been teaching her all along, not just through words, but through my actions. By standing up for myself, by refusing to be taken for granted, I was showing her what it meant to value oneself. I hoped she would carry that lesson with her, that she would learn to build her own life on a foundation of respect and responsibility. If you're listening to my story and you've ever felt invisible, ever been made to feel like you don't matter, I want you to know this. You are not alone. Your sacrifices are seen, even if they're not always acknowledged. Your worth is not measured by what you give, but by who you are. It's never too late to draw a line, to reclaim your dignity, to choose yourself. As I sit by my window now, watching the world move quietly outside, I feel a sense of gratitude for the lessons learned, for the strength found in adversity, and for the hope that tomorrow can be different. My story is not just about loss, but about rediscovery. And if you're hurting, if you're searching for a way forward, I hope you find the courage to write your own new chapter. Share your story if you wish. Sometimes the simple act of telling it is the first step toward healing.